Hey guys, it's Sam. Welcome to my new YouTube video. Today I thought it would be helpful to do a walkthrough of this portrait that I just painted in my sketchbook. I will leave the reference attached below, and I'll also be using my mixed media etcher sketchbook. It's the one with the little llama down in the corner. You want to make sure your sketch is light like this. I'll leave my sketch in the description for those of you who want it. I'll have my palette on display so that you can see all my color mixing, as well as using this one size 1 round brush from Polina Bright. Again, I'll have that linked in my description. And I'll also be limiting my color palette to just these 3 primary colors from Daniel Smith, specifically Ultramarine Blue, Pyyrol Red, and Hansa Yellow. I also want to give a quick shout out to Moft, the sponsor of this video. They're the reason that I'm able to get a lot of these good angles. As you can see, they are a tech company that specializes in origami inspired products. This is their snap phone tripod stand that uses MagSafe technology to snap onto the back of my phone. It can be folded in various ways to get up to 30 different angles. This is amazing for content creators looking to get great angles, and also for artists who need to get really up close shots of their art process. And since it's MagSafe, it can just be removed whenever I'm not using it, so thank you to Moft. If you want to get one yourself or are interested in seeing more Moft's products, I'll have links in my description. As always, I'm going to start all my portraits with wet and wet techniques, which means I'm going to be laying down a layer of clean water to drop my pigments into. This layer should be wet enough where the paper is thoroughly saturated, but not so wet where puddles are forming and you can't see the paper texture anymore. I typically start most of my portraits with lemon yellow, which is a cooler color yellow than Hansa is. Hansa is more warm, so I'm going to cool it down with a little bit of our ultramarine blue in my palette and start laying it down where I see shadow areas in the face, which are by the temples, alongside of the nose, underneath the brow ridge, underneath the lips. This whole first layer will just be yellow, so it helps us map out where our shadows are and kind of like where the contours of the face are before we go in with darker colors. Plus, since this is wet and wet, this first layer will dry super light. And with wet and wet, the paper is continuously drying as you're working, so you want to make sure that it doesn't get too dry before you're finished, or just finish before it's too dry, because otherwise it won't blend the right way. I generally decide to stop when my paper starts to look like this and then wait for it to dry completely.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Now I'm just going to check to make sure that it's dry with the back of my hand, and it is, so I'm going to go in with my second layer. Again, just laying down some clean water to drop my pigments into. This time we're going to try and add some more colors. Using a little bit of this yellow and red with a hair of blue, I'm going to mix up a warm shadow color for underneath the cheekbones and to lay down like a deeper shadow color so that I have an even better idea of the contours of the face. If you're feeling a little bit confused as to how I'm placing these colors and where I'm choosing to put them, there are general areas where there are shadows on the face, like I said, like underneath the brows, underneath the nose, underneath the lips, the cheekbones, etc. But you can also just look at your reference picture and blur your eyes, which is what I do, because it helps your eyes like see the contrast and kind of divides it more into almost a two-toned picture instead of multiple colors. I feel like when you're in focus, you can see every little change in hue, which is not important for these first few layers. While the face is drying, I started to try to comprehend the hair a little bit because he does have white hair. This is going to be a little bit more difficult. I mixed up a little bit of the lemon yellow with a hair more ultramarine blue, so it's kind of more green because you can see these green colors going along the side of the hair, and I made sure just to map out a little bit of what I'm seeing there. Moving on to the ears, I want to mix up another warm shadow color using Hansa Yellow and the Pyyrol Red together, and just going ahead and adding the shadows where they are in the ear, and the canal and underneath. I don't even know what the ear anatomy is, but you know what I'm talking about. Now we're going to mix a darker warm shadow color, and to do that we're just going to make sure we have more paint than water in our mixture, especially compared to our previous mixtures. And I'm using a mixture of all 3 of these with a little bit more of the ultramarine blue just to neutralize it a little bit. His other ear is not in shadow of his head, so we're going to just mix up a light peachy color using a diluted little bit of this red, maybe add a little bit of yellow if you want to warm it up, and laying a light layer and then dropping in my shadows like I did before, but just not as intensely. Now I'm checking to make sure the face is dry before we go in with our 3rd layer. As you can see, those first few layers really helped map out where all these next shadows are going to go as we mix them up, so it just really helps us out without making, any permanent decisions. I'm going to be mixing up kind of a greenish shadow color here and placing it right underneath the cheekbones. Basically, I'm just placing this darker shadow color where I mapped out all the shadows prior. Up here by the eye, I did notice that it's a little bit leaning blue, so I added a hair more blue when I put down this shadow. And then also on the insides of the eyes, it's a lot warmer because towards the center of the face you're going to get warmer colors. And this also applies to underneath the lips because the lips are reflecting that light and creating a reddish tone underneath of them. Whenever the shadow's a little bit lighter, I'll dilute it with a little bit of water like around the nose. And when it's darker, I'll add more paint to my mixture because adding more paint will up the opacity. I'm making sure to add these subtle shadows underneath the bottom eyelid and also between the eyes because your brow ridge kind of creates a shadow there where it dips down. Now I'm just going to be mixing up a warm reddish color using red and a little bit of Hansa yellow to get around the nose because like I said, the center of the face, like the T-zone area, is where you're going to see a lot of those warmer tones. Right now with this warm neutral shadow color I have on my brush, I'm going to dilute it with a little bit of water and sweep my brush across the page just to create more subtle shadows like where the lips are. I'm going to make a dark red using a little blue and red together, and I'm going to make this top eyelid line to really define where these eyes begin. And with that same dark red, I'm also going to define the crease of the upper eyelid. And to start also putting a shadow around the outer rim of the iris where it's darkest. I'm just going to drag this color up and extend the shadow up to the top of the brow ridge. These shadows created by the eyebrows are a lot more prominent and seen in masculine faces, so when you're painting masculine faces, they're a lot more angular and they create a deeper shadow because of that. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix up more of that dark red color so that I can start to paint the crease of the lips and get in this really deep shadow. This like neutral brown color is taking up a lot of room on my palette right now, so I'm just going to wipe for some room and mix up a red for the lips. I'm using red and ultramarine to get a dark red and then adding a hair of yellow to neutralize it a little bit. And I'm going to be going and kind of blending out from that crease that I previously painted. Typically the top lip is always in shadow and the bottom lip is highlighted by the light, so I'm going to make sure that I'm diluting my red for the bottom lip and also making it a brighter color, so I'm adding a little bit of yellow just to warm it up. As I connect this down here, I'm going to leave a little space of paper where the highlight is, grab a clean brush, and then blend out this top lip as well as this highlight a little bit. And since blending out the lips kind of removed a little bit of the depth, I'm going to add it back in by mixing up more of that darker color and re-putting it in the crease. Now I'm grabbing more of this ultramarine blue and also going around the rim of the iris for the left eye like I did for the right. Also making sure to define the upper eyelid, but adding a little bit more red to that so that it's not blue. Once I'm done blending in between the iris with this gray color, I'm also using it as a shadow and then deepening up the eyelid crease. Now I know the face is starting to look a little freaky, but I'm just going to start on the hair because it's kind of glaringly, not even started. So mixing up this neutral purple color using all three and just laying down this shadow color in the back of the head. Just checking to make sure my face is dry before I go in for my final wet and wet layer. This is mainly to add back in the warmth to the face. It's looking very yellow right now, so I'm going to add my reds in where the rosy cheeks are, around the nose, around the lips, around the eyes. It's really around everywhere where I'm seeing these red tones. I'm making sure to have more paint in my mixture where I'm seeing darker red and making sure to dilute it with water where I'm seeing it to be a little lighter. While I'm at it, I'm going to deepen up these shadows on the inside of the eyes with a little bit of ultramarine blue and yellow, and I'm going to continue deepening along the rest of the face to create more depth. A lot of the time in portraits you'll see a blue-gray color kind of where the eye bags are, so I'm going to utilize the same color we used for the hair to make those shadows. I'm using a lot more ultramarine blue in my mixtures just so that I get a darker color when I'm deepening up my shadows. I know I just keep saying deepening up shadows, but that's ultimately like just what I'm doing in the last few layers is like making sure that the depth is there, the contrast is there, and that all the colors are accurate to my reference as best as I can. As I mentioned, the hair is going to be really difficult to paint. What I ultimately did was I'd use the red and the blue to create some sort of violet, and then I would just kind of create different mixes with that violet and a yellow to neutralize it and play between those, using the violet as the shadow, yellow as the highlight, and then kind of mixing it together to create more of a neutral color. As the head is developing, it's becoming glaringly obvious that the neck is like underdeveloped, so I'm going to mix up a really warm yellowish, almost slightly green shadow to go right underneath the chin. And for the side of the neck that's in highlight, I just mixed up a diluted peachy color and connected it with the shadow. Just like we did before, mixing up a warm shadow color using all of these 3 pigments and creating a deeper shadow underneath the chin. To blend the shadow better into the neck, I'm going to grab some of this gold color on the side of my brush and just go over where I painted before just to create a more seamless blend there. Now I'm grabbing some clean water and using the side of my brush again to blend out the bottom. Using what's on my palette and adding a little bit of red, I'm going to create more shadows in the ears. Again, using that bluish, like gray violet color we used for the hair to use as a shadow underneath for the hairline. Now I'm noticing the lips are kind of washed out, so I'm going to grab some more of my Pyyrol red and really deepen up the upper lip shadow. I kind of almost like when they blend a little bit into the skin, so I'm grabbing a clean brush and just like softening up the edge. For the lips, my mixtures mainly contain just Pyyrol red and Ultramarine blue. I might use a little bit of yellow just to warm up the red a little bit so it's not so intensely saturated, I guess. But for the most part, it is just like mixing up shadow colors with Ultramarine blue and then using the Pyyrol red. Just kind of hopping around to the features. The eyes need a little bit more defining, so grabbing more ultramarine blue and then mixing it with a little bit of red and yellow just to create more almost like a black. I want to go around the iris and really define where that is, and I'm just going to do the same to the other eye. Now I'm going to be adding in the pupils. Now that the paper is dry and we're adding wet paint to it, this is called wet on dry technique, and blending becomes a little bit more difficult. We're going to lay down our paint as you see me doing now, and then I'm going to rinse off my brush, dab it on a towel, and use a little bit of the dampness from that brush to soften up the edges, if that makes sense. It's easiest to lay your brush on its side when you're doing this. The forehead is looking a little flat, so I'm going to utilize that yellow-violet mixture and just add some shadow to the temples. Now I'm just going to start painting out the eyebrow hairs from the shadow. It really does nicely for making it look realistic. And then just doing the same on the other side of the face, making sure to keep my brush strokes really light and wispy. Again, now that the paper's wet, it's really easy to get really deep colors because there's not the water diluting it with wet and wet. So I'm going to go over these shadows one last time just to make sure that they're as deep as I want them, creating the depth that I want, and making sure to blend out the edges with clean water. Going to be using a little ultramarine blue to finally put in these nostrils that have been missing for this entire portrait. Just got granted his sense of smell, I guess. Just going to be adding some highlights using white gouache paint from Holbein. This step is obviously not necessary, but I just like to add highlights sometimes to up the contrast and to make the picture pop a little bit more. But yeah, that does it for this portrait. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I hope it was helpful and you learned something. If you have any questions about this video or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you later. Bye guys.